This week, we welcome Jake Reynolds, Technology Alliances Engineer at LogRhythm. In the security news this week, Google Chrome has a critical vulnerability. Flash has another zero-day exploit. Imagine that. Colorado passes the most stringent breach notification law. Hackers hack a plane from the ground. And in the final segment, we are a pre-recorded interview with John Kinsella, a co-founder and chief product officer at Layered Insight. All that and more on this episode of Paul Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Welcome. Did Larry have an introduction? Hi, everyone. This is Paul Asador, and I guess I'm introducing...
Apparently, I no longer do. Wow, and I look short.
So, yeah, I accidentally landed in New England and stumbled my way to the G-Unit studio.
That's pretty much how I envisioned it happening, Jeff. Carlos, save the show, please.
Yes, somebody's got to do it.
Cannot be saved.
Well, it's good to have you back, Carlos. Jeff, welcome. Nice to have you in studio.
It's great to be here, Paul. Try to stay awake for the whole episode.
Yes. We've been in studio dropping his phone incessantly. Welcome, Chad.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. In 2017, an increasing number of companies reported they did not have effective insider threat detection methods. LogRhythm's UEBA solutions enable you to detect and neutralize user-based threats in real time, while built-in scenario and behavior-based analytics empower you to expose insider threats, compromised accounts, and privilege misuse. Visit LogRhythm.com to learn how their UEBA solutions can help you expand visibility and enhance detection capabilities.
Welcome to Paul Security Weekly. This is episode number 563, recorded June 7th, 2018 at G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. My name is Matt Alderman, sitting in for Paul. Let me start with a couple quick announcements. Oh wait, no, let's do intros first.
Cool.
See the order here, you know, sitting in for Paul is kind of weird because
That's right.
he always does this and I get to watch him do it. Anyways.
You can do what you want. Do it any way you want.
I'm going to do it. So in studio with me today, sitting in so I don't look like a complete fool, Doug White.
Yay! I will look like the complete fool. That's why they have me. Yeah.
Whew, good.
Somebody
took that role.
Yeah.
On Skype with us today, we have Jeff Mann. He usually fills in that role every once in a while. Hi, Jeff.
I'm always a fool. Good luck tonight, Matt, on Matt's Security Weekly.
Thank you. Ooh, I like that. MSW. That's a new show. Also with me on Skype is Jason Wood. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Matt. How's it going?
Thank you. I don't think we've done a show together before, so this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
And also joining me on Skype is Keith Hoodlet, one of the hosts for Application Security Weekly. We've met briefly, so welcome.
Thank you very much. And to quote Mr. T, I pity the fool.
All right, let's start with a couple announcements before we dig into our first interview today. Ticket sales are open for Social Engineering RI Conference Saturday, June 16th at Salve Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island. Go to se-ri.org to register. We're giving away 2 tickets to the conference, so send your best memes of Paul and Larry to psw@securityweekly.com. And since neither one of them are here, you guys got to come up with some really, really good
the competition
ideas.
Is already fierce.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen some good ones, and especially
we've had some good entries.
Yeah, especially the X-rated ones, but that was,
Yeah. Also, check out our on-demand material. Some of our previously recorded webcasts are now available, including the state of security training and education and the state of endpoint detection and response, on demand at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, so let's get into the interview. So we're going to welcome Jake Reynolds from LogRhythm. Welcome, Jake. He's available on Skype.
Welcome. Hello, thank you for having me.
So, Jake, you run Tech Alliances, so you get to work with all the integration partners on the LogRhythm platform. But before we start, some big news for LogRhythm last week. So, you want to give us a quick little update?
Yeah. So, not much more to update, right? So, Thoma Bravo has announced that a plan to acquire a majority holding. That should close sometime next quarter, and we're looking forward to it. Right, should give us a few more resources to kind of accelerate a lot of the initiatives that we've been working on.
Great. So the way we're going to run this segment, we're going to focus on kind of that efficient advanced security operations center SOC component, and I want to start. I think most people know LogRhythm. Been around for a while in the SIM space. You guys also do some user and entity behavior analysis. Just for the people who aren't familiar with LogRhythm, why don't we just kind of start, give us an overview of kind of LogRhythm's platform, kind of the problems you're trying to solve for the customer base, and kind of give us that quick little overview.
All right. So one of the primary goals, in a nutshell, is to try and make the SOC as quick and efficient as possible with the resources that you have. Right. So the goal as a next gen SIM, even though we've been in the space for a while, we've been constantly evolving and trying to put together a platform for the SOC to kind of gain that level of efficiency and efficacy as best as possible. And there's a lot of hurdles to that, but some of the biggest ones are making use of all that data. Right, you've got all these disparate sources. There's various forms of analytics that need to take place to kind of figure out the signal from the noise, and then work with it, and as quickly as possible make a call as to whether or not maybe an alarm is qualified. Something actually is happening that you need to look at, investigate as quickly as possible, respond and remediate. And then, kind of close the loop, right? Look at everything that you did, data coming in, actions you took, look at playbooks, how cases were handled, and analyze that and figure out where you can streamline things, steps you might need to add or remove, or tools that may have helped you detect or respond faster.
Is that like what they used to call this stuff group decision support systems? There's this old term now, but I saw one once, and it actually had all these different factors, touches, and things out, and it wasn't a SOC, but it was for all this other production stuff, and they use these things called churn-off faces. And so this giant wall with all these faces on it, and you assign different attributes to the features on the faces, so that when you walked in, you could look at the wall, and if all the faces are going like, you knew that there was a problem maybe that was going on. I mean, I thought it was a pretty interesting idea, and there was some psychological stuff behind it, and I guess the turn-off guy that developed this was like those human behavior research. I don't know. See, that's a happy face. That means things are good.
That means things are good? Do you have happy faces on the UI there, Jake?
No happy faces. We've got a couple, you could use different colors. We've got lots of widgets on the dashboard system. So kind of like that turn-off board concept, you can walk in, take a look, and very quickly assess changes. Unfortunately, there's a lot of glare, but you can look at, like a trend line analysis. And if you see a spike there, that's not normal when you walk in first thing in the day. That might be somewhere where you'll focus. And then, of course, we have, standard alarm outputs. We've got a card view and a grid view depending on what works for the SOC. But those things have their own color coding, risk-based priorities, and then a full case management system. So if you are investigating something, you've got one evidence locker that you can kind of store your logs, associated alarms, any kind of actions that you've executed from within the platform, or even like file attachments or notes from outside the platform. And then the beta version that we've been playing with has kind of a playbook capability, right? So you no longer have to like turn to a spreadsheet or a binder. I always remember a binder from mainframe days where you go, okay, I'm going to go execute this command. Did I do that? So those checklists will be in the platform, and you can much like you can look at our alarms to try and figure out mean time to detect and mean time to respond. You'll be able to look at a full case and say, here's how long this playbook took to execute, or these steps in this playbook. Maybe they're not necessary. Maybe they can be streamlined.
Now, when you talk playbooks, some people think playbooks. They think, the SOA vendors, the orchestration automation vendors. Is that kind of automation, orchestration kind of capabilities there? Or are these playbooks really for the analysts to kind of run through their checklist to make certain decisions, but it's still pretty manual? Where is that kind of where's that line drawn with the LogRhythm?
Right now, it's primarily the latter, at least for our playbook functionality, right? So if you're in the middle of a case and you're checking off those playbooks, that kind of tells you where you are in your investigation process, maybe what you've learned. But our Smart Response framework, which we've had for a number of years, allows us to use within the alarms, we can go and execute those automated actions, right? So in an alarm, maybe you'll have something that's fully automated because it's enriching things, right? You're going to reach out and grab context from a threat intelligence vendor or query the CMDB so that you have an idea of right now what are the CVEs tied to this device. Although we could do that with our log data, it's just kind of an example. And then other things that maybe you don't want fully automated, or maybe you only want fully automated for very specific alarms where like the log telemetry leaves no doubt. So if you're going to do something like quarantine the CEO's laptop, you might want a human being that pushes the approve button. And maybe you want their boss to have to push the approve button too. And so that stuff's handled through our alarm system, our alarming interface. Those will probably show up within playbooks, right? Because it's a modular portion of the framework. So we can do that in the alarms. If you're analyzing log data, maybe you're digging into seeing some other activity that you either found on the dashboard because it was interesting, or you're responding to an alarm and you stumbled across something else, then you can kind of execute those ad hoc from our log analyze interface. And then because of that modularity, eventually we will be able to put those into playbooks. But right now they're really in the search and alarms context at the moment. Got it.
So if I think about kind of the three main components, you got ingest, and we'll talk about some of those integrations where ingest is important there. You got the analytics component of you analyzing, correlating all this data, trying to identify that, and then this capability to do some level of response from a playbook, maybe a little bit of automation. But in a nutshell, think of ingest, analytics, and kind of response, kind of automation activities out the other side, right?
Right. So yeah, we bring all that data in. We perform a certain amount of machine computer enhanced analytics. When that's enough to make a decision or to trigger off an alarm, then we'll bring that to a human's attention, and then hopefully make it much easier for the human to analyze all that data and make a final call if it's needed. And then those scenario-based analytics rules can go that all the way from 0 to 100 if you're comfortable with the decisions that it might make based on the data that you're bringing into the platform.
And you didn't say ML or AI in that whole.
I was going to say, where does AI come in?
I know. I was thinking. I'm thinking. Oh shit, we're all going to have to drink AI ML. No, you didn't do it. This is good.
I had my hand on my glass. It was like,
well, it's a tightrope, right? So there, as the SIM platform, right? There's a lot of stuff that we have to do with that data to make it useful, right? So. I've worked on the data analysis side and trying to find threats within signal that you've already got, and raw logs aren't enough. Even if it's a fairly structured format that's got a finite number of things that can be in it, kind of like NetFlow v5, right? You've got some ASNs, you've got some packet telemetry, some in and out. You get some timestamps if you can figure out when things booted and run those deltas, but that's only partially useful without context wrapped around it, and metadata, and normalizing all that so that when you look at it, you don't have to disconnect yourself from things like protocol number, and you have that protocol name right there, right? Sometimes you need a little bit more. Okay, this is the space protocol that's actually being used out on the internet here and there. It's actually at the IP level, but there's only like 15 or 20 devices out there that maybe use it. That's potentially useful information once you dive into looking at the data, whether you're the machine or the human.
Right. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, you run Tech Alliances, so integrations are important. There's certain things you do yourself. There's obviously other sources of data. Paul kind of breaks it up into, he talks about SOCs and SIMs. He thinks log, network, threat, vuln, kind of endpoint data, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of your ecosystem's got to be pretty big, right, to think about all the different sources of, just on the ingest side, thinking about bringing in endpoint data, bringing in network and log data, even the threat intelligence to do the correlation. So kind of walk us through kind of what that ecosystem looks like. Where are some of those key data feeds that you need in the platform to really make it effective?
All right. So first off, I'll say, I don't run technology alliances. We're a small team. There's 3 of us, but I am the technical resource on the team, right? So I'm the guy who, when we're talking about partnerships, I get to peek at the APIs, and I get to figure out what's the right way to bring that data in, or if we normalize it this way, how is the analytics engine going to look at it, and how can we kind of, sometimes we call it closed loop security. Now that we're bringing the data in, what kind of actions might we ask that tool to do, right? And sometimes that's based on the tool's telemetry, right? So, using a firewall example, we bring in firewall data, we look at it, we decide, hey, we want to go block this IP address. Sometimes that's something else. We might see, maybe DNS query data that says, hey, we should go block this IP. Well, I can use those same smart response integrations to go out to a couple of different firewall vendors and say, hey, go add this IP to this list, and then that will maybe block it or treat it differently in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, that's absolutely correct. On the integration side, as a SIM, right? We're only going to be as useful as the people who are using it, right? Your people need to be well trained. They have to have good processes, and then in order for the SIM to be useful, we've got to deliver the right data the right way for them to make a call. And then execute on that call. So I wouldn't necessarily call them full integrations, but we process data from over 950 kinds of devices. But when we refer to an integration, that's kind of where we dig deeper and we have direct relationships with an organization. And a lot of times that is, like you mentioned, around network and vulnerabilities. They give us a lot of good either evidence of something going on or contextual data, so that, say I see an IPS-IDS match, do I need to worry about it? Oh, well, that's a Windows attack and that's a Solaris box because, the vulnerability management system tells me so. So I'm not even going to bother to alarm. Or maybe my analytics will fire, but it's not going to alarm for the SOC. So I've got that evidence there in a package somewhere I can go refer to later. Maybe if I'm looking at some other incident and that may be related, it's available to us, but it's not, making bells and whistles go off to draw people's attention.
Jeffrey?
So that's a big chunk of it. And then, as I said, feeding back into those other products to execute something. So the big ones, that are coming up, as you said, the network's always been around. People have mostly been looking at user behavior from, or user data from here's what they're doing on the PC. But we all know that's kind of getting blurred now, right? That demarcation is moving off to, right, like I've got a cell phone and I'm doing my corporate email on it, or working with sharing files. Even enterprises are moving to Dropbox and Box and those things. And and you don't necessarily get that same visibility. So we've been doing a lot more with cloud data sources and more importantly, identity data sources, right? So instead of just kind of looking at the on-prem telemetry, as people are starting to move towards a zero trust model of networking, where your authentication, as you authenticate to the network, that matters, and ensuring you are who you say you are. The governance around your your permissions and your access, and what things get provisioned to you, and then privileged access around that for admins or on the network side. But then even maybe in financial or HR realms where they may not have the keys to the kitchen for Active Directory, but they sure know and can mess with the payroll system. So they're juicier and juicier targets. So all of those things kind of look differently in terms of the stream of evidence that they feed into the platform. So we've built tools to make that easier, right? So we now have the concept of true identity, where you can kind of have an identity container, and all of my logins, all of the telemetry that I might generate, because I may be Jake.Reynolds in Active Directory, and I may be J Reynolds in the Linux systems, but maybe we have some legacy AIX boxes that have never been upgraded, and that's on I don't know, NIST Plus, and I'm limited to 7 characters, right? So I may have lots of different login names, and if as a SOC analyst, if they need to go in and see what I'm doing, they don't necessarily want to have to remember or have to go to a table or something and look up what does this guy look like throughout the environment. They can kind of quickly go to our interface and hit the search button and say, show me all the authentication data for Jake as an identity, and get all of that back in in one big thing. And then it's much easier to say, okay, well, what has this person been up to, or what has their account been up to? Because maybe I'm compromised and someone else is doing something off on the side while I'm doing my day-to-day activity, or maybe I'm disgruntled and I've flipped from white hat to black hat, right?
How do you manage those identities? I mean, how does that actually, is there some kind of centralized source that's managing all those different identities? So I'm here, I'm there, I'm somewhere else. And how do you know that all those are me and there's not another D White that's at this other operation that just happens to have the same name?
Well, and so we have an API for working with that particular partner. Mechanically, it's just a list, right? Here's that container. Here's that list of Jake Reynolds versus Jerry Reynolds, and maybe there's some J Reynolds in depending on when we're provisioned, I may be J.A. Reynolds and he may be J Reynolds, and vice versa, right? J.E. and all of those. Usually there's a source of record within an enterprise. Sometimes that's HR, sometimes it's in the CMDB, ServiceNow, something like that. And so those can be manually edited within the platform, but there's also an API available to work with that, so that when HR provisions a new user, that can be configured to reach out to a REST API and say, hey, you're going to synchronize this from that source of truth, whether it's Oracle or SAP or some other cloud provider like Okta or Active Directory. Because that's going to be different for every org.
Jeff's doing Tai Chi, or I think he wants to say something.
Yeah, I think.
No, I was thinking Tholian Web, but that's where my mind is.
Okay.
You mentioned you support over 950 devices, and then you also at some point said something about if you discover a legacy device. And I'm not meaning to derail you, just out of professional curiosity, because I'm recently back into the PCI world. I was wondering if you guys do anything in particular or have any particular capability of monitoring older systems that are perhaps unsupported in the current times. Is there anything particular that you guys can do to address those types of systems, or you're just taking whatever you get out of them and do what you do?
So that might depend highly on the source. To be honest, we very rarely age things out unless there's a collection issue. So if there's I can't think of a good example offhand, but if there's a log source that requires an API to go and get that data, and maybe that log source is unique to your environment, or maybe it's no longer supported, and that that API has gone away. If that API is there and it hasn't changed, we'll keep working with it. If they change if they change the API, maybe we can't maintain that. That's kind of the only time that we might kind of lose connectivity to a legacy source. We try to stick to, if there's something that's end of life, typically they're writing out to syslog or to a flat file, and for us that's mostly just regular expression rules to break that out into fields and then normalize that against our metadata. And so there's no reason for us to kind of delete those unless there's a hurdle to gathering that data that we can't support.
Gotcha.
And just
okay.
I was going to say, just for the record, it took you less than 30 minutes to say PCI, and I took my drink when you said it, by the way. Everybody else on the call needs to drink up.
Very good. Very good.
I was ahead on that, so.
Okay, keep going, Jeff. Sorry.
Let me catch up. So let's say, for example, a recently out-of-date Windows platform like a Windows XP. You're able to take whatever it's able to spit out in terms of log activity. Yeah, I get that part. But you're not necessarily, I guess what I'm looking for is, are you looking for anything in particular in terms of activity that might be dependent on, I guess this goes for supported or unsupported operating systems, that might indicate that a system's not as current as it could be if there's a patch missing, or does that require more of the manual inspection and the SOC kind of knowing what they're dealing with?
Well, in that case, especially something like a configuration issue or patching, we would leave to our ecosystem, right? There are lots of vulnerability management, configuration management tools out there. That said, we can certainly take that log telemetry and see, oh, hey, this finding in this scanner has been popping up for X number of days, and our scenario-based analytics engine could easily find that kind of thing. And there's some, there's also some other kind of deeper analytics that we can do on, maybe baseline or trend analysis, where we could say for this operating system, the trend is, that it's patched within 90 days, and now this has fallen out of that, right? So, there are things that we can do, but for the raw visibility part, that's where we turn to our integration partners.
So final question on this vein. So like, let's say it's a Windows device and it's operating as a point of sale system. So it has certain activities that's pretty standard. Do you have the ability then to detect an alert on extracurricular activity, anomalous activity? Essentially, are you able to baseline systems so that you can notify the SOC operators, hey, there's some weird stuff going on in this box that we haven't seen before?
Absolutely, and in that specific case, we have we have a fair number of retail customers that have us deployed on their point of sale system. So we do have an agent. Sometimes it's used to just collect raw log data. But if you put it on a device, we can do some file integrity monitoring, process monitoring, and some network and user connectivity monitoring. And that data is something that we can put into. We have a number of behavior analytics rule blocks that we've had for many years now. Back before UEBA was actually a segment. There's some whitelisting, baselining that we can do. Like I said, there's statistical trend analysis, and so we can feed that. Things like show me all the login telemetry for this endpoint or processes that are normally running. It's given a learning period and then an analysis period for after that, and then it could do a sliding scale. So that's definitely something that we have. In the case of like a POS system, we probably have analytics rules built into the platform because that's a pretty standard deployment for us.
Super, thank you.
Great. You talked a lot about user. Where are you getting other requests for kind of additional data side? I would imagine, with all the cloud deployments, there's got to be some cloud stuff, maybe some application stuff. I mean, what kind of other requests are you getting to get integrated into LogRhythm?
For data ingest, like I said, identity has been a big new one, and there's a lot of veins around that. And then, we've been seeing more and more network visibility tools, things like, we have our own network monitor, but also Landcope, now Cisco Stealth Watch, Darktrace. There's a lot of, people are taking those statistical analysis models and patterns that they've been using on either user data, but also looking at that from the network side. So, we've got customers and asking to get that kind of data into the SIM too, because it's useful for saying, oh, hey, there's something kind of anomalous going on over here. Now go and see if you see some other kind of behavior that correlates with it in a certain time period, right? Our scenario-based analytics they don't require specific pieces of log data. So if you build a rule that says, oh, I'm going to look at this network visibility piece here, maybe that's something that peaks on the wire and does deep packet analysis, and something signature-based here, maybe Suricata. And then look for something that kind of seems like an attack over there, and then some data from the firewall. If you swap out one of those components, swap a vendor, say at the firewall side, the analytics aren't going to break because we're looking at those behaviors, that normalized taxonomy of data that I mentioned we generate at log ingest, and so then the analytics just kind of work as it goes through.
Okay. Anybody else on Skype? You guys are quiet out there tonight, except for Jeff.
I was as you were talking about this network information and system information, I was thinking about application, AppSec type of things. How are you able to handle things like events or whatnot that are being logged from web applications or things like that that are maybe feeding data into the system?
So if it's from like a known source, right? Like we can read most database telemetry, raw Apache and Nginx logs. There's some of the cloud providers can provide telemetry there. If it's kind of a bespoke logging source, though, like it's your own app's logs that you're writing to a file or sending out over syslog, that's something that you would probably need to write, like a custom parsing rule around. And we have a fairly powerful platform for doing that with, where you can write your base regular expressions and then break that down into kind of what we call tags, so that the metadata is right there, and then apply activities to those when certain tags, match a kind of logic, right? So this log entry is always, web activity, but when you see this tag and this tag, that's authentication failure versus, the same first tag, but it's different second tag, and that's an authentication success, right? So then you don't have to remember what was the what's the Windows Active Directory code for successful authentication. Okay, now I got to go find 4 or 5 of those. You just say, show me authentication success across Active Directory.
Okay, and so all that's built off of those tags to make it easy to filter and whatnot.
Yeah, and so we can work with any kind of logging data. It's mostly about delivery, right? So the collection part. If you write to a flat file, if you send syslog, and you point it at an agent or have an agent handy, then we can get that data together. Oh, there went the lights. So that we can work with that. It's when an API call has to be made that things kind of change and get sticky. And we can, we're working on better solutions for that to be more modular. In the meantime, we have a couple of design patterns that we can use to help customers get to that data.
Cool.
How do you fingerprint all those devices? You're talking about the known devices that are out there. Are they fingerprinted in like Kerberos type things, or how is that working? So if I go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, so I walk in and stick a new device on the network that actually is vulnerable to a whole pile of things that you didn't know about. I mean, is that detected immediately and it's flagged, and you say, okay, that thing over there is a big problem because it doesn't have a fingerprint or whatever?
Well, so in that case, that would kind of probably be up to like a NAC provider or some kind of network telemetry, which says, oh, hey, 802.1x flipped this a port on, and that brings some visibility up elsewhere. But in terms of like sorry, it's in terms of like bringing in data for new devices that we're trying to fingerprint. That's usually a combination of this new log source turned up on this IP address. It's sending to this particular port, and then we can kind of figure out based on the data coming in where it's going to fit in the log source schema.
So
okay.
I'm a big container guy. Anything on the container front yet of trying to bring in some of that container activity? Are you seeing requests for that and wanting to integrate that in and tie that data in with other aspects of the environment?
So I've seen a couple of requests here and there around Kubernetes. Most of that is kind of on-prem with a customer. So we may actually have that in process, or professional services may be working on that, because that's there isn't a company for me to go to and harass to try and get samples out of, and due to the way that they can be configured and deployed, they can kind of be a little custom per environment. But some of those container management systems, like the AWS sources, we can pull in through, like CloudWatch events that we already, or maybe it was CloudTrail events that we already process.
Yeah, combination of a couple of them actually.
Right.
Probably need some CloudTrail and some CloudWatch.
I have one quick question as well. So I've seen a lot of security companies respond differently to GDPR regulation, and I'm really curious how that affects the SIM space. Just because with all the data that you aggregate, it must be tough to adhere to it without, with giving your customers enough information to actually make actions or take actions on that, but at the same time, not gather data that's personally identifiable.
Yeah. So for the most part. Let me start by saying, so we have a GDPR module that can help customers report on their compliance and what they're bringing into the SIM, and kind of mechanical adherence to those standards. But in terms of we're just kind of the aggregate of that data, so we kind of leave it on the customer to say, if you're bringing in a custom log source, there may or may not be PII in there, right? And there are some data masking capabilities that we have if the customer feels that they need them. And then in some cases, GDPR allows you to say, I need this data because security, and they may be able to use that as a justification. Our platform also has some data segregation capability, because we're deployed by systems integrators and MSSPs and stuff, where a certain log source can be tied to an entity, and then that kind of can keep the alarms segregated and the analytics from bleeding over across sources within separate entities. And so if you built an organization, say a European organization where you have a presence in Germany and a presence in Austria, and that may not seem like different things, but they are, and you could set up your entities separately and then have different kinds of rules for how those things are used, right? What kind of masking you apply, and who can see what and respond to those things.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen some customers respond to it where they're like, we're just going to drop the last octet off the IP address and call it a day, which seems like a really bad response. But it's good to hear that you have kind of solutions fixed to customer needs as appropriate for different data sources from those given countries that need to be conscientious of this. So it's good to hear.
Yeah, and we're not making the call on what country's data should be handled a certain way. That's kind of a governance issue, and since GDPR allows countries to kind of pick their own poison and go more stringent with things, that might be a bad call for us to make on a customer's behalf, right? But we do have tools in there for them to work with that data however they see fit, and to help them stay compliant.
Yeah, isn't the IP address considered PII now under GDPR? So doesn't that create some interesting challenges from a correlation perspective?
I guess.
Yeah, and the last octet may not be considered. Dropping the last octet may not be considered enough to limit that privacy invasiveness depending on what other data is in that log, right? And so all the more reason that, like we can, although it can hamper the analytics, we can mask, all IP addresses to, 1.1.1.1 and do a separate mapping that way. But, but each of those are going to be, problems kind of that the customer needs to, our customer, I should say, needs to be aware of, and then make a call on how they're going to use that data and why. Right? Like I said, GDPR doesn't say you can't take it in and use it. It just says you have to have a justification for it.
Got it. Yeah, I can just see that.
And consent.
And consent.
You have to have consent.
Yeah. Yep. But again, some organizations, and I don't know that GDPR has been enforced long enough for them to see this, but SIM could be, they may use that as a forcing function to be allowed to collect more data. So that's kind of a theory people have been pushing around the last couple of weeks.
Of course, as long as you kept it all internal, it wouldn't matter anyway. I mean, if it was just your SIM and it was in your house and you controlled it, then it wouldn't, I don't know.
Probably wouldn't be as big a deal. But still, you still have to worry about that data potentially getting exposed somehow.
Well, no, you'd have to protect it without a doubt. And the users could say that even though they're employees, I think you would have to have agreements and consent with them, so you're collecting what they're doing at work.
Well, and I think this also applies over to the user and entity behavior stuff, right? Because now you're tracking their user IDs and what those users are doing. I think there are some potential ramifications there too.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying that'll be interesting to see how that evolves, because as it's not just that login, or even if it's just an IP address, as you put together the chain of actions that you're using to do the analytics, that probably becomes more and more identifying, right? So protecting that data, protecting the evidence that you collect in a case against someone, those are all things that we're gonna have to take into consideration as this thing kind of takes on a life of its own.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, so this begs the question, how do you offer your solution? Is it on-premise? Is it cloud-based? Is it hosted? Do you have customers that are, MSSPs that are using it? All of the above?
A little bit of all of the above. We don't offer a cloud-based. The one that we don't cover right now is a cloud-based offering. Although that's something that's been talked about. Maybe we can dig deeper and accelerate on that, given the Thoma Bravo situation. So, so right now, if you came to me and said, "Hey, I don't want to manage this. I just want to log into it and use it," I've got a long list of MSSPs across the globe that I can point you to that offer varying levels of, managed, co-managed. They could run it on-prem and manage it for you, or they can run it in their space and let you access it. And then a lot of the larger systems integrators are helping organizations use and deploy it.
Cool.
Great. Jake, thank you very much. Any final actions anybody should take away from the session today? Any call-outs?
Do we ask the 5 questions is the question that I have.
Oh, I don't have the 5 questions in front of me, so you guys
That's
are
right.
have
We
to
know we know the 5 questions.
Then go for it, because I
Jake's
don't
up
remember.
for it.
Okay, Jake, get ready. Go, Jeffrey.
All right.
I may not get them in the right order. Jake, name 3 words to describe yourself.
I said what?
Perfect. If you were going to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
How to break things and influence people.
Nice. If you were a serial killer, what would your weapon of choice be?
Spoon.
Very good. In the game of Ask Grabby Grabby, would you rather go first or second?
I think here I take the Microsoft model and embrace and extend, so second.
Ooh.
Very good, very good. And a final question, name 2 characters to be your parents. They can be alive or dead, fictional or real.
Past, present, future.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go with maybe Grace Hopper and Tank Girl. I can have 2 moms, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
You can now.
Absolutely.
You can now.
You can now.
Unless you're in the following states.
All right, with that, thank
Just
you.
may not be able to get them a wedding.
Yes, thanks, Jake, for the interview, and we'll take a short break and come back and go through the news.